As always, though, we start off with our headlines of the week. And I love my next guest who's going to be doing a review, Joseph Mary Monson. Joseph, thank you and welcome. Thank you for being here. I just want to give people the picture of the first story that we're going to be dealing with, and maybe they've read about this. She's been, I think, cruelly dubbed the pavement killer. This is the story of Auriol Grey earlier this week. She was convicted to 3 years imprisonment. And what happened, it was for manslaughter. She was on the pavement. She gestured in a hostile and aggressive, quote unquote, way to Celia Ward, 77. Celia Ward was on her bike on the pavement, and it was a shared pedestrian and bicycle way. So Auriol gestures and says, "Get off the pavement." This poor lady, her bike wobbles and she falls into the path of a car. There are no winners to me in this story. Auriol was given 3 years sentence. Now, Auriol has so many disabilities, sight. Clearly, she's, although deemed not mentally ill, and she is somebody who's given to outbursts. She was in sheltered accommodation. Her defense lawyer has said that if she goes into prison, there's no one to look after her belongings or anything like that. Joseph, as I said in this, to me, there are no winners in this. The driver of the car is traumatized, and we mustn't forget a 77-year-old wonderful woman lost her life. But, what are your thoughts on this?
Trisha, good afternoon, firstly. Trisha, sometimes when you do these introductions, I think you should be the advocate and not me, because you are spot on in summarising this. There are no winners. Yes, we've got a terrible event. It's a manslaughter, it's a homicide, but we can all say it's a sad story, can't we, from all sides? As far as Mrs. Grey or Miss Grey is concerned, although in a legal sense, you see she has cerebral palsy, she has she lives a very lonely existence. There seems to be some mental and emotional development that's been stunted, no doubt connected with her various illnesses, because she's in terribly poor health, and one senses that that's been a lifetime situation. She gets 3 years for manslaughter, but she pushed somebody out of the way, essentially into an oncoming car. She has that mitigation of her condition, but she's not sufficiently mentally disabled for the courts to care about it. And that's because, here's the thing, Trisha, justice is cruel. In circumstances where there are no winners, the perpetrator is often labelled, marked, and punished, irrespective of their background. And it's a sad part of our cruel system, because you know what? I have represented people. Most experienced criminal lawyers will have represented people in the past, numerous people in the past, who have terribly sad stories from a young age. And at some point we stop pitying them. At some point we decide, well, you were in care, you were abused, you've had a disability since you were a child. That's affected, no doubt that's affected your ability to engage. And that, there are hints of various disorders, even in this story with Miss Grey. And I'm not a doctor, and she was represented, presumably well represented, and they didn't find anything that got to the limit. But her lack of ability to express, the lack of ability to empathise, which should and probably did set off all the alarm bells. The court doesn't seem to have recognised it. We must assume that the solicitors
Joseph, here's the thing. 3 years. Is that a fair sentence? Many people, and actually this is going to be our question of the day to the audience. Do you think that that's fair? Other people, what does 3 years usually give?
Trisha,
I can think of a lot of other crimes that don't get that amount of time in jail.
That's right. And you know what, Trisha? I have, you're asking the wrong person in this regard, because I've watched in the last 10 to 15 years our prison system, which wasn't great, turn into badly organised, unhygienic, cruel bedlam. by neglect rather than intent, and by lack of funding. I actually don't think that that society and government should have a right, except for public protection, to send people to prison until it sorts these things out, because I think our prison system is a drug-ridden, infested disgrace at the moment. And the idea of a severely disabled, getting on for elderly person being sent to prison, in the type of prison where I know the type of conditions she'll be in, and I know the level of neglect.
Gosh.
You're asking the wrong person, I'm afraid. If we were talking
about 3
years,
Joseph, three. This is the thing, 3 years. Yeah. I mean, what sort of other crimes get 3 years? I'm sure you must have come across cases that are probably, I'm not saying we compare things, but worse. I mean, the intent. Horrific from all sides, but come on, there are people who've done even worse. I'm sure who've got off with much lighter sentences.
Yeah, and it's not horrific in other senses. A one-punch manslaughter emanating from a fight, for example, on a Sunday football pitch, can result in a sentence of 2 years. It seems to me that there was extensive mitigation. I don't like criticizing judges for being too harsh any more than I like criticizing them for being too lenient when I wasn't in the case myself. Could the judge have given less in the circumstances? Absolutely. But Trisha, who are judges recruited from statistically in our society? Well, they're not recruited from all levels of society. That's a problem. There's a lack of representation as far as diversity is concerned. But generally speaking, prosecutors are more likely to be recruited to judges' positions than defense lawyers. Oh. What does that tell you about the attitude on sentencing? Not of all judges, but a trend towards punitive rather than rehabilitative, and judgmental rather than understanding.
I just think it's a really sad case, and I'm going to just articulate that question of the day to get some feedback from our audience about what they think, just in case we are completely out of step. Who knows? The next story we have to come to is the lockdown files. These are the files that, these are all of the WhatsApp messages that Matt Hancock gave journalist Isabel Oakeshott. Matt and now have been originally for the book, but have now been made public, were given to the Telegraph newspaper. On just that, I mean, before we get on to the actual subject, on just that, I'd just like to say that, you know, we've read, I read that Matt Hancock said he really feels betrayed. And part of me said, and there's, again, it's a whole bigger subject, but just on Matt Hancock saying how terribly betrayed he felt, you know, seeing all of this out in the public domain, given he was trusting in someone, I kind of thought that's probably how your wife felt when she saw those photographs of you and your lover. Just saying. Not going to use the word karma here. Yeah. No, Trisha, don't say karma. But let's move on from that. The actual, what's the fallout from this? I didn't say karma. I said don't say karma.
As the great Bob Marley once said, if the cap fits.
What? There's a whole load of stuff, isn't there? There's Boris Gate that comes out of that as well. I'm interested in your there he is, save lives and all that sort of thing. I mean, all I can say is the Tory government doesn't really make great decisions in whom they trust. They choose to trust. You could say Matt Hancock trusting Isabel Oakeshott, given her very public stance on lockdown. You could also say Boris Johnson, didn't he choose Sue Gray? You know, and now it's like that's all forgotten. That's why she sees that I'm a baddie. Just talk us about what, as a lawyer, how you see Boris's approach to this. Should we have been expecting a rats I've been found out mea culpa?
Yeah, well, it's Rishi on the one hand and it's Boris on the other. And you've got to ask yourself the question, is this an overreaction? they're seizing papers and devices from the home of Sue Gray now. They're not just saying that she shouldn't be that she shouldn't be allowed, or that she should have some gardening leave before she joins a Labour Party staffing job. That looks a little bit Gestapo to me. It looks a little bit kind of of a state overreach. It's police-like behaviour from a political perspective, because of course the Tories are hoping by raiding her house, to find evidence that the whole Partygate thing, her whole investigation, which you're right, they were saying again and again and again, we've got the best person in the business. We should allow her to do her report. We shouldn't speculate till she's done her report. But now, because the report didn't say what they liked, they're saying, well, the whole thing was tainted by her involvement beforehand with the Labour Party. And if they proved that she'd agreed or was negotiating with them at the time, then perhaps it will raise questions about her findings and somehow bring Boris back into our affections. But Trisha, let's consider this. Will it really change anybody's views about the parties after all of this time? I think probably from a legal perspective, the problem for the Tories is that procedure has overtaken events. And that's because we all remember, don't we? Boris Johnson was given a fixed penalty notice and he didn't appeal it. Irrespective of the evidence she found in her investigations and her findings, by not appealing it, he's admitted that he carried out the offence. That's the legal position. He's had his opportunity to challenge it. He's decided not to. It means de facto an acceptance of guilt, and sullying the investigation afterwards by, doing all that. You just don't see politically, that legally how it will help. But from a political point of view, and this isn't my expertise, but it's hard for me to see how the Tories benefit from reopening this mess again, because it's not to convince anybody. And if Rishi is hoping to distance himself from the mistakes of the past, which is pretty much the basis upon which he stood the first time and the second time, how can he do that by rehabilitating Boris? I think the British public, on the whole, at the moment, the mood is probably they've had enough of Boris, and the Tories are probably best to just let all that lie.
Yeah, and photographs. I mean, what next? They're going to say they were faked or something like that. You wonder, don't you? Let's talk about Stephen Bear. This is the reality star who has just been sent off to jail for, voyeurism. There was consensual sex that he had with the Love Island young woman, whose name slips my mind because I don't watch Love Island. He has been sentenced to, I don't know how long in prison. We've got, if you're watching, those Georgia Harrison was a person, but I don't know, it's sort of Andrew Tate-like to me, the whole persona, turning up at court in hired Rolls Royces with a new woman on his arm and what have you. It was like a show, doing selfies and what have you. But at the heart of this is a really important issue, isn't there?
Yeah, and I'm glad that it's been reported so widely. You're right. He's some kind of odious lad-type figure, isn't he? There's something of Andrew Tate about him, and there's something of the fate of Andrew Tate about his fate too. And let's just go into what he's done. We're talking about sharing private video of a private sexual act with somebody he was in a relationship with, and it's a 19-month prison sentence. Fair old bit of bird, Now, I'm a defense lawyer, so usually I'm talking about why people shouldn't go to prison, but I think it's important that there's an example about sharing these intimate photos. The way that people express themselves sexually in the modern internet kind of smartphone age has changed. And it means the way in which people can be hurt can be magnified, publicized. It can be made permanent. The interesting thing is you couldn't think of a better example, except perhaps the half-English Andrew Tate than Stephen Bear, because he's really made it part of his persona, his career, the way he projects himself as a kind of lad misogynist. So The sentence.
And he got, just jump in there. He actually got 21 months, and we were talking about comparison with sentences. The last lady we were talking about, the so-called pavement killer with disabilities. That's an interesting comparison. But like you say, to take what's an intimate moment, and it's been suggested that, trying to make money out of it, or making that your persona, or enriching yourself and your reputation in some way by using that sort of footage. It is. And there's this lads cult that's sort of come out of the whole Andrew Tate movement, which a lot of young guys whose first experience of sex would be porno, are sort of thinking, yeah, this is the way to go. So do you think the whole fact that it probably worked against his whole cause, all of this flashiness didn't pay off?
Yeah, and do you know what? He made the cardinal mistake. When you're stuffed on the evidence, you plead guilty early and try and neutralize the problem. Instead, this sentence comes as a result of a trial that he lost in December. Any chance of having that sentence, and Trisha, any sentence under 24 months can be suspended. And a judge will usually want a good reason not to suspend it. He got 21 months. And what was that good reason not to suspend it? It's because he pleaded not guilty. He put his fingers up to the court in the face of reality. Anyone could see what he was trying to do. He brandishes his sexism, his misogyny, his poor attitude to women as part of his, he's somebody who he's not particularly bright, but he's somehow managed to find a niche in society and in the media that's consistent with his odious personality of hating women. Right now, there's an overreaction to feminism. There's a lack of kind of moderate male voices that aren't completely they're not completely emasculated on the one hand, but they're not on the other. There's that other extreme, and you have these people like Andrew Tate and Stephen Bear who are kind of they're dropping into a sense of lack of male leadership among young male men, lack of powerful male.
Well, Joseph, I'm trying not to use the phrase that he's fallen on his sword, because that's the first thing I thought of. But again, it's a day. Well, I was using the phrase in a very Shakespearean way. But again, the word karma is a word that comes up again. I mean, the whole thing is this, in this day and age, and it goes right back to Matt Hancocks and everything else. In this day and age, to think you're safe on WhatsApp, with any, cameras around. I mean, outside of Beijing, I think London's got more sort of surveillance cameras and what have you. To think that you can do stuff and get away with it forever, you've got to be a little bit, a few sandwiches short of a picnic. I think that's the overarching message. Quick last word to you. We got to go for a break, but lovely having you forever. What would your sage advice be to the people in his situation? Just cop a plea, put your hands up.
I think first of all, try and modify your behavior in advance so that you don't fall foul of this. Try and act in your life as if all the things that you do could stand up to scrutiny. If I'm deciding whether to do something, I ask myself, if lots of people knew about it, how would I feel about it? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm capable of a mistake just as much as any other man or woman is. Yeah. It's not a bad rule to tattoo upon your brain.
Thank you. I had an executive producer who used to say to me all the time, whenever you send an email or a text or anything like that, just imagine your lawyer standing up in court and reading it back. Joseph Cotry Monson, lawyer and broadcaster, and all-round brilliant guy. Love talking with him, especially taking the legal point of view and I think a pretty moral point of view.